and I'm chairing tonight's meeting.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Kamaljeet Nagpal, and I am the Cabinet Member for A Fairer Start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Myself is Councillor Mahinder Mehta.
Good evening, Matt Milovanovic, teacher and rep at Norfolk High School, also Ealing NE president.
Stephen Sims, Ealing NEU and National Executive. Hi.
Mark Nelson, Head of Schools HR Consultancy.
Lewis, Director, Learning Standards and School Partnerships.
Tamara Quinn, Assistant Director for Planning and Resources.
And anybody online?
It's Councillor Greg Stafford, Ward Councillor for Hanger Hill.
Thank you very much for that. So I think we received some apologies for absence, Jack?
Yes, we have. We've received apologies from Dave Woods and Amanda Calver. Thank you.
Any other apologies from anybody else? I think we've got apologies on the union side from Dee Higgins and Neetu Malhai. Is that how you say it? Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you want to say on that first point then? Because
No, thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
We discussed, and the quorum is of the full committee, including union side members, and therefore today's meeting is quorum.
Excellent, thanks for that. So I'm not aware of any urgent matters. Pausing to look around the room. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody wants to make? No, that's okay. And I don't think there's any matters to be considered in private, so that's okay. So if we can move on to the minutes, they were included in your packs. So I think Councillor Nagpal and I checked them for accuracy. So if you can find any typos in those, it's because we didn't look close enough. But if you just want to have a look through those, just to see. Spare copies. I think this one, yeah, there they are. I'm just waiting for a bit of a pause. And so are they agreed at as a record of accuracy? Yeah, looks like they are. And in terms of matters arising, it doesn't look like there are any either. Yeah, I think they're covered in the agenda as well. So if we just, so we're already on item 6, that's pretty good going, I feel. So these are the first 3 are union side items. So workload update. So who's going to talk about that from the union side?
That's me, Chair.
Okay, off you go.
Thank you. So just to pick up on the last EJC, so we are still officially in dispute as voted by members this time last year. Even though we promised that we'd have further analysis of our survey and to progress the campaign, we have been preoccupied by the national pay campaign, which has taken up obviously a lot of our time and resources. That being said, we do note that the council said they would launch a 2-year national pilot. We were just hoping for the progress on that and the updates. From our perspective, we've not had any significant reports, or in fact any at all, that the material conditions on workload for our members have improved. We were just wondering from the council's perspective what the progress was on that front, and if we can have an update on that, please. So that's on the 2-year national pilots.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to take that from council side?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Chair. Yeah, so going back to the workload item, I mean, we are confident as a partnership that many schools, most schools are already taking, you know, robust and strident action to reduce unnecessary workload. Ealing Learning Partnership launched a wellbeing charter back in 2020, I think, co-produced with schools, and I think the NEU were part of that, involved with that charter, and that set out amongst a number of measures to support the general principle of wellbeing in school, the specific workload recommendations of the DFE, and obviously chiming with the NEU survey. So we've encouraged our schools, you know, through that process to be making sure that staff appraisals include a review of workload, that there are active systems for promoting good work-life balance, and schools have worked, many schools working to shorten the day to allow for directed time to be incorporated within the normal working day rather than bolted on, and, you know, encouraging, you know, cultures where breaks are taken more frequently and calendars shared in advance, etc. And certainly our work with the 14 out of 17 secondary schools that are part of the partnership, our link officer who works closely with all of those schools feels that, you know, the vast majority have made considerable efforts and adjustments to improve retention and well-being through those through that DFE guidance. And many of our schools, in addition, have mental health first aiders, and we work with that network and through our health improvement in schools teams to encourage, you know, schools to place as much emphasis on staff well-being as they do on children's well-being, and to connect the two. And in fact, we had a fantastic presentation at our primary head teacher meeting, and we had all heads there last term, you know, talking about the impact of that direct correlation. With regard to the 2-year pilot, which I'll just come to now. So this is a pilot that Ealing Learning Partnership was selected for alongside 3 other areas of the country, Sheffield, Surrey and Milton Keynes. And it was a pilot to promote ways of working between schools that fostered greater peer-to-peer responsibility and accountability, really advocating the high challenge, low threat culture, and a culture that supports schools to improve rather than be constantly proving. And that is really at the heart of everything that we do in the partnership. Because if you're constantly trying to prove yourself to external audiences, then that automatically leads to unnecessary workload and production of reports, and data collection, and all of those things that we're trying to avoid. So what the 2-year pilot does, and we're you know, good 2 terms into it now, is it brings together 65 schools that are supported in groups of 12, and they're led by serving heads, and they operate a model around peer inquiry and collaborative learning, and have a rotation of triadic visits that involve heads, leaders and practitioners to really identify areas that they want collaborative support with. And it's for the school to identify, you know, what those themes are, and to actively look at best practice in the other schools that they're visiting. And what that's developed over a period of time is a really healthy culture amongst the schools that are involved in it. And we've documented the progress of that to our sponsor, and that's ISOS. And ISOS is a research and advisory company that develops policy in the public sector, as a very well-known research body. And together with ISOS and the University of Nottingham, we are documenting our journey through this model of school-to-school support. So we place a very high premium on cultures and ways of working that retain people in the profession, that help to make people feel connected to colleagues beyond their own school, that help to make people feel supported by colleagues, you know, beyond their own school, and that we feel that is has such a major part to play in retaining our workforce and in supporting growth and growth mindsets. So Claire Rees is leading on this work, and I'm sure she will be happy to share the end of year review that we've just submitted to ISOS, if that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. So Stefan, I saw you indicating, and I saw Matt as well. So Stefan first.
Thank you. That sounds great. All the bits of it are very encouraging. The first thing is we would like to be formally involved in it, and maybe NEU headquarters can be part of this. I've got a couple of questions first. The retention, because one of the ways to measure is how well Ealing is retaining, if they're doing this in comparison to how well it was retaining in the past, even though everything's got worse, and how well we are compared nationally, because that's an indication that it's working. The second point is we're not getting the feedback in the way that well, let's put it a different way. I and local officers are receiving, we've just had a recent reps training, and workload is still complained about on a massive level. Now, I'm not knocking and I'm not trying to decry what has been done, because that wasn't just a silly preface. I did actually mean it. That sounds really good. But my genuine question is, how can that be happening? And yet my reps, and there were 60 at the reps training, are reporting that things are no better, it's getting worse. That doesn't mean you're not doing what you're doing, but there is still a disconnect between how members of teachers are perceiving it and how it's actually happening. And there is a big gap between the two. I mean, there could be, one clear bit of evidence rather than perception is how well is our retention rates compared to the national average, and how well are they improving? Because nationally everything's getting worse. Head teacher recruitment, SLT recruitment, classroom teacher recruitment, retention, all of that's getting worse. So if even if Ealing stays level, that shows that something is positive is actually happening. So it's an open question. It's partly rhetorical, it's partly open. How can the two exist? How can we be getting that 60 reps is a lot of feedback, and that feedback is workload is an issue. It hasn't got better, and yet everything that you just said, I'm keen to report back to HQ and say, look, Ealing's doing this and Ealing's doing that, and can we get, and they will say, well, can we get other local authorities to do it? Because that sounds great, Stefan. But how can we have the two?
I mean, I would love to have a retention of teachers and leaders in the borough as a marker of the partnership success. I would love to do that. I'm not sure how we would get the data, so we would have to have, and Mark may have some ideas about that, but I think it would be a significant measure of our success to know that we're holding on to teachers, that that teachers are looking for promotion within the borough, that we're not having difficulty in recruiting to key posts. I know we're fighting against the national shortage certainly in particular subjects. So I'm not going to for a moment say that, you know, we've got it sorted here. There's a huge set of challenges to be addressed. But I think what we're about as a partnership is creating the conditions for staff to have support, to feel that they're being looked after professionally and personally, and that there is somewhere to go if they're feeling overloaded or concerned. And that's why we've trained up these mental health first aiders in schools to help kind of create that capacity. But I don't pretend for a moment, Stefan, that we've got it sorted. All I can say is what we're trying to do. And I think there are some early measures of success in terms of changing cultures. There's less of an obsession with formal lesson observation or formal reviews that constantly are judging schools rather than supporting them to grow. So I think, you know, anything that we can do collectively and as a system to place value and celebrate that work is where we should be putting our energies. And the ELT board in May has identified, you know, retention and well-being as what the key theme for the ELT National Conference in March 2024. So if there are kind of speakers or particular schools or areas that you feel are further ahead than we are, then, you know, we would love to have their input in that conference as well. So, and I suppose going back to the concern, and we've said this in previous meetings, if there are individual schools that you are really worried about in terms of workload and the impact that's having on retention, then, you know, let us know and we will work with those individual schools. So I've tried to present a kind of collective endeavour, but it's a long journey. It's a considerable challenge.
Thanks for that. And Matt?
Yeah, just like Stefan, I do actually welcome a lot of what was said there. I mean, particularly the point you just made around formal lesson observation is definitely quite welcome as a teacher. You've actually touched upon what I was going to bring up, that actually workload issues vary school by school. So I think certainly, obviously, from a union perspective, that's negotiations and discussions between leadership and our reps is essential to sort of actually identifying and resolving issues within schools. My query around the sort of the ELP project is is there direct input from staff, i.e. our members, into this? Because even if workload does reduce tangibly by number of hours, what work is being done is also quite important, because if it's seen as, if I'm just talking purely perception for our members, if it's seen as a sort of top-down structure, this is what you must do as you're told, the sort of feeling around it won't change too much. So perhaps, and this is where we might come in if we're formally involved, actually input directly from teachers and educators in schools into this project. What does it look like? Obviously, the clear solution for us is kind of how can we encourage discussions between staff, workplace representatives ideally, and leadership directly within each school. Perhaps there's a model we can sort of publish and promote that can be followed. Apologies if you've already signposted this. So yeah, that's kind of my question. So how can we get that direct input from staff at schools?
Yeah, no, thanks.
And Stefan, do you want to just come in quickly and then I'll let Julie sum up?
It's questions, not contribution. We would just to emphasize that what you're doing and the plans and your approach, we would very much like to have that in order to share that with our membership, so that they are aware, because that may actually help quite a bit. That's my first point. Please, may we have it. Secondly, can we be formally introduced to, did you say ISOS and Nottingham University? I'd like them, either via me in my national executive capacity, to meet with senior staff at HQ, just to have an understanding. We'd even be better if we had an input as well. But at the moment, we would like to have a clearer, not clearer, a more detailed understanding of what's going on, because that is something that our reps and our membership, if they knew of that, would be able to work with. Emphasis on word with. So can we have an introduction? So can we have what you're doing so that we can share with the membership, particularly our reps, but we will share generally with the membership. Secondly, can we have either myself or HQ? I'd like to bring in senior staff from HQ to meet with Nottingham University on this so that we've got a better understanding. And thirdly, at some point when this national pay dispute is over, we did one survey and we've shared those results with you. We would like to repeat that, and therefore that's a measure. If the questions are the same, more than happy to share or reshare what the questions are, because you might want to add more and tweak it. We want to be collaborative in that. And hopefully there is some sort of comparator. Even if, and I'll say this in advance, as the level of retention nationally is getting worse, both for head teachers, senior teachers and classroom teachers, the stats are just getting worse and worse and worse. So it's going down. Even if our survey from then compared to now is about the same, that's good to put in a front. But but that would be one sort of measure. I understand that there isn't a way, but maybe there should be a way in which we can monitor retention in Ealing compared to London. Because our membership perception can always go, well, it's just too much workload, it's too much workload, and not notice that there's been small improvements. So concrete numbers and stats is really important, both from our perception, because otherwise our reps are just saying it's rubbish, it's not working, it's just as bad.
I think we get the general idea, Stefan. So Julie, do you want to just say something else? Because I think we need to keep moving through tonight's agenda.
So I suppose I'm absolutely happy to share the report of the pilot that we're involved in. I don't want to give the impression that this pilot is all about reducing workload. The pilot is fundamentally about changing the balance between formal accountability and the behaviours that creates, and genuine accountability to one's children, parents and peers. Yeah, so that's what the pilot is ultimately about, and that's what we're being measured on in terms of its success, is how well does this new way of working create cultures in schools that are focused on improving rather than improving. And so I'm also happy to direct you to the national website where Ealing is featured. But you would obviously have to take up your interest with ISOS and the other organisation, AEC, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, that'll come back to me, who are leading the pilot, and the University of Nottingham. So you'd have to take it up with them. We are I was going to say a pilotee, I don't know what the phrase is. We're one of a group that's been selected, so we are being scrutinised rigorously. We have to report to this body every half term on our work. So it would be them that you would need to engage with rather than us. You know, they're monitoring us. Yeah, that's fine. But the organisation is also very focused on alternative ways of demonstrating schools' value to parents and to children. In other words, not based on Ofsted reports, but on other markers of success. So I'm sure that will be music to your ears as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm going to move on now then to the item 7, NEU national strike days. Who wants to talk about those?
Nice to meet you, Chair. This is just for information more than anything. Happy to answer questions. You're aware that we're back, we've called strike action for July 5th and the July 7th. The other bits of information that you need to be aware of is we, at this moment in time, according to the feedback we're getting from our members, believe that we've crossed the threshold earlier this time than last time in terms of the reballot for teachers. We don't know for certain because that's Servacare, but in terms of asking our members have they voted and then projecting that the total, we believe that we have electronically at least crossed it, and the accuracy of our dashboard compared to Servacare appears to be accurate. We are also confident that we will be successful, but we haven't done it, so there's always room for complacency, unfortunately. So, but at the moment, we think we will overcome the support staff ballot. Last time we had 48 or 47.5%. We think this time we're likely to be over it. And I am reliably informed that the NHT are also confident of passing their ballot. We, like everybody else, is aware that Rishi Sunak is not going to ignore, is going to ignore the independent pay review body, even though Gillian Keegan said leave it to the STRB. So we've waited for the STRB, and now Rishi Sunak says, I'm not going to listen to the STRB. This has caused an immense amount of anger amongst members in terms of the hypocrisy. Along with Gillian Keegan saying you can't have a pay rise in April because inflation is rising. And now we're being told by the government that we can't have a pay rise because inflation is falling. It's got to be one or the other.
Yeah. So are there any questions about the NEU strike dates, 5th and 7th, and also the reballot for the autumn term? Mark?
Yeah, we've recirculated guidance to schools on the strike, but they're, if you pardon me saying, they're getting quite used to it now. They know how to plan, how to risk assess, what to do, and how to deal with any particular issues that come up. One interesting observation is that when we had the first strike back earlier in the year, because we asked schools to let us know how the strike will impact their school, whether they'll be able to remain open, whether they'll be closed, or whether they'll be restricting attendance, which is a DfE phrase, by the way, not an Ealing phrase. That's what they use. And when we first asked, we got a big response from schools. We probably got 65, 70 schools responded to us. On the last strike date that the NEU took strike action, we had 12 schools respond to us. Now, we do send reminders out. We can't force schools to tell us what they're doing, as long as they're telling their parents and what's happening. But of course, we'd like to know. But I just commented on that because I just wondered where they were giving the information, because it seems that the DfE are aware of it. And apparently what I was told is that the DfE now have a new system with schools where they collect a lot of data. Schools sign up to it, and most schools have. So they'll feed that information in to the DfE. They may not necessarily tell the local authority. Not very helpful, but that's where we're at. So we've asked schools again, we've asked schools to tell us so that we know whether the school will be closed, whether it will be open, whether it will be restricting attendance. And so far, it's a trickle, not a flood of responses. And the strikes are only next week.
Okay, I've seen you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just 2 quick questions. Firstly, in terms of strike deductions, we've been grateful for the number of schools have actually sort of staggered the deductions. So if it was 2 days of action a month, they'll take 1 day from 1 month, 1 day from next month. I do appreciate that you wouldn't be in a position to instruct schools what they should do, but would you be able to confirm, so our reps have the information that schools have the ability to stagger if requested, so that the schools can't respond with saying, oh, we're not allowed to, they are allowed. And secondly, Mark, I'm very interested in the sort of responses. I know the last one had only 12 schools, but the first one has 65 to 70 schools. Are you able to share some statistics on that in terms of percentages, if it's possible?
Yeah, I haven't got that information to hand, but I can let you know if you want me to. I can send you the information, but I haven't got it to hand here. On the first question, yeah, you're right. We don't instruct schools how to deduct pay from staff who are taking strike action, but we've already told schools what date they have up until in July, that if you put the information through by that time, it will come out in July. If you leave it until after that time, it will come out in August. Most schools, as I'm aware, are quite sympathetic to spreading the pain, if you want. The one thing we're a bit concerned about is that those deadlines that we've advised schools, one of them is the 20th of July. So if you make something after the 20th of July, it won't go through till August. Well, as we know, the summer holes are fast approaching. So that's right on the border. But ultimately, it's down to schools to enter the data on the system at the appropriate time to make sure the deductions are made.
Okay, thanks for that. Stefan, do you want to say something more?
To just come back to Matt's question, it is possible for the local authority through gatekeeping, for example, to say that the schools have got the ability to spread it, or are they already aware? That was one question. About question number two.
We've already told them. So we've issued the strike guidance, and then in the covering email, we've said we're aware that some schools have asked about staggering strike pay deductions. This is what you need to know. If you do it before this date, this will happen. So heads have already got the information.
And the second thing is, we were discussing disaggregated ballots. In talking to the regional secretary of the NSUWT for London, their understanding is that even in community status schools, that it is school by school, not the whole community block as a whole. So even though many of the primaries, almost all the vast majority of the primary schools are community status, each school falls or passes as a school, even though they're community status. So it's not the whole community, it's not all the community schools in Ealing as a block, it's each individual community school. That's the understanding of the NSUWT.
Yeah, thanks for that. So can we move on now from that one? Thank you. So the next thing on the agenda, still union side, is hot classrooms. So who's going to lead on that?
I am chair. This is a follow-on from trade union forum for those that were there. It's an important ask in terms of what limited resources schools and local authority have on the matter. We are asking that the local authority have plans and or ask schools to have audits and risk assessments of which schools are too hot. They know them anecdotally because everyone knows that that classroom's too hot and that one isn't. Nonetheless, that schools draw up plans to reduce the temperature in their worst offending classrooms. That can be done by planting trees, putting reflective foil on the windows, buying more fans, and even though air conditioners are about £400 for a one that is recommended, over time, over a number of years, the schools can buy one a year or a couple a year so that they are ready. And where are they going to store the air conditioners and the fans, and how are they going to get the trees planted? But so that when we are raising this in 5 years' time and we are getting more heat waves, the trees would have grown a bit, we would have got the silver foil on the windows, there will be more fans, there will be more air conditioning units, because otherwise there'll be more and more classrooms where the children cannot learn. And as a father of a year 10 daughter who's quite bright, chose to not turn up to school because she knew she was going to be in this classroom where she wasn't going to be able to do any learning, so she stayed at home. There's just going to be more absenteeism because parents are not going to in primary school, parents are not going to want their child to be suffering for the possibility of heat stroke. So these aren't, I don't think these are, can the local authority agree at council level to and with staff to come up with an audit and a plan that all schools aspire to in terms of trees growing in front of south-facing windows, reflective foils, having a regular amount of money set aside to buy another couple of fans, to buy an air conditioner once a year, anything that moves so that those particular very hot classrooms are not hot. Is that not possible?
Anybody want to pick up on that? I think that was directed more at the councillors from where you were looking. But I don't know whether Councillor Nagpal or Councillor Midhope, do you want to say anything?
Well, I think before I make a comment, I'd rather go to Tamara, because Tamara, I know, has been doing some work in this space, and I know has reissued guidance to schools and is all over it. So I think it's best if we hear from Tamara first.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nagpal. Thank you, Stefan. So in terms of kind of broader plans and guidance, so the council updated the guidance and reissued it recently to remind schools. We've also raised it through the primary and special school head teacher briefings, high school head teacher briefings and quadrant lead meetings, drawing their attention to the guidance and better preparing for hot kind of summer temperatures, whether it's in a heat wave or just generally warmer temperatures in classrooms. We've also asked for feedback from schools around things that would support them to enable to take that forward, or specific issues and concerns they have. We haven't had any specific feedback from schools or any incidents or concerns raised this year in respect of that or in terms of planning. The guidance does set out risk assessment templates for schools to use, and that links into the broader decision making for school leaders around use of aspects of the site, purpose and activities that are being carried out in those spaces, and navigating the warm temperatures within the accommodation they have. So to some extent there are limited actions that schools can take, but proactive actions, as you suggest, are already within the gift of individual schools, and the funding sits with schools to take forward those actions and activities. So it's really important to understand if there are any particular examples of concerns being raised by staff that aren't being addressed by schools, or concerns at school level, so we can target our support appropriately to those schools. So schools have received a small amount of funding from the DfE, and that's been in response to net zero carbon emissions objectives, and to some extent they're linked in with some of the broader adjustments to accommodation that you're describing, because that will impact on use of mechanical ventilation, etc. And so schools have been taking some of that forward, but I think each school is quite different in terms of the challenges they face, and the flexibility that some schools have within their site is quite different school to school. And so it's really important that school leaders take forward those conversations with school staff, and school staff are flagging where there are particular concerns around the thermal comfort within classroom, and listening to students as well where they're raising concerns. But I think that intelligence coming back from school leaders, and we continue to raise it with school leaders, and if there are other suggestions that you think might kind of gather better information around this or intelligence, that we're happy to consider that. But it is really crucial to understand that the schools have specific decision-making powers and responsibilities in respect of health and safety on their site, and the funding is delegated to schools. And so our role is really around support, advice and guidance, but also where there are concerns, challenge with support to schools. So those specific examples are quite key to us being able to address some of the concerns that you're raising.
Okay, thanks for that. Matt, do you want to say something? I think you've got sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I would just add that, I mean, I think Tamara's taken us through it really well, but I mean, ultimately we can issue guidance to schools, but ultimately it is the school's responsibility to, you know, complete risk assessment, and it's the leaders within the school who need to take responsibility for what's happening. We can just offer guidance and help where possible. And I think the team have done a great job in doing that. And like Tamara said, I don't think we're having that much, we're not getting much from schools in terms of, you know, concerns.
Matt, I think you've got something to say.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to respond to what you said, Tamara, and also just to pick on what Stefan said earlier. So just emphasize the point that schools do have that sort of power to do what they want. At my previous school where I was rep, we did negotiate actually 15 mobile aircon units to be purchased. So that was pre-cost of living crisis, to be fair. However, I think there's that capacity for schools. And on that note, as part of the guidance, could we possibly signpost actual recommended resources schools can purchase, which the council can say, here's what you can purchase and here's how to use it, so they can actually install that. And on this, just going on a slight tangent, possible guidance for parents and families in terms of major heat waves like the ones we've had last year, I think would be quite welcome, actually, perhaps. I think we're in a position where attendance is haphazard because some families are making decisions for themselves. So just helping both schools and families understand what would be the recommended approach, even if it is just sort of passing on from DfE guidance, but just making it clearer and easier. And yeah, I just want to pick up on the point. There isn't a legal maximum temperature in this country, but I said this last time, I'll ask again, is there any capacity where, and we'd be more than happy to be involved this way, we can negotiate a recommended maximum temperature in schools in Ealing? Because I think that's really what our members are looking for, because it's already too hot in classrooms. It's 24, 25 degrees. My head teacher's already said to kids, you don't have to wear ties and blazers. Male staff don't have to wear ties, or anyone else who doesn't want to wear ties. So these are measures that have already been implemented. We could have temperatures that are 10 to 15 degrees warmer. I think we do need something quite concrete. Again, we're not going to make a recommendation because we're happy to negotiate, but it is something that, I mean, this is perhaps a question for the council, something that you'd be open to, because I think it is a matter of urgency for our members.
Thank you. Anybody want to come back on that?
Yes, Chair. Surely, Councillor, the local authority isn't just left with senior officers giving guidance. Surely you can take a position on this through full council meetings in terms of what you want to see schools to happen. So I understand that it's up to the school in terms of following guidance or not, but it would help if the local authority took a political position to say, this is what we want to see in our schools. We want our children not to be dying, not to be suffering from heat stroke, not to be suffering from heat stroke, to be able to learn in comfort, and that you want your schools to adopt a number of measures, and then give that political steer to the officers. Surely that's possible.
Councillor Lagpole, do you want to say anything?
I mean, I think, you know, there's a fair point there, but I think ultimately the schools in our borough, every school's very different. You know, some schools have aircon, some don't, some are older than others. You know, every school is unique. And so, you know, what we're doing in terms of issuing guidance to schools, I think is the best thing to be doing. And ultimately, every school will take that guidance on board, and then they will, you know, look at their own situation in their schools and adapt and use that guidance as necessary. So I think we do have the right approach. Of course, I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I think our approach is a good approach.
Okay, thanks for that. We're going to move on now. Oh, sorry.
My question is slightly different. like a hot classrooms. I want to ask the portfolio, have you got the funds, the council, you can bring the improvements? This is the main thing, like a new fans, AC, air conditions. So it all depends on the funds. Have you got the funds? You can bring all the improvements?
I think Tamara's indicating, so I think Tamara wants to come in on that question.
Yeah, so the local authority is allocated condition works funds, and they're largely in respect of kind of the refresh of aspects of the school site, like new roofs and new boilers, water systems, etc. There is absolutely a mismatch between the funding that's available for condition works and broader commitments to net zero and the impacts of climate change. And so the local authority doesn't directly have funding that it can allocate to adaptations, etc., to school site to manage challenges around hot classrooms. Schools do have delegated budgets and can deploy that budget through specific grants issued by the DfE, which we have to say are relatively small in comparison to the level of spend that might be required. So we're talking about, you know, a few £1,000s rather than what you might need for a whole mechanical air conditioning system for a school. And so that is a genuine and real challenge for both schools and the local authority. So those steps that Stefan has mentioned and other steps around, you know, blinds, timetables, mechanical fans and ventilation and purchasing them early in the year before stocks run out are all things that we continue to signpost schools to. And I think there's, you know, there is an element of both the local authority and more broadly feeding back to the Department for Education around this aspect of managing school accommodation, and that continues to be a challenge, and the Department for Education recognises that. So we attended a conference a couple of weeks ago around school resource management, and this was not hot classrooms specifically, but some of those broader aspects such as biophilic principles in schools, using you know, shrubbery, trees to manage the climate within the school building instead of mechanical control. So I think there's a broader awareness that's beginning to be kind of better understood and more and prioritised by schools, but I think there's still work to do. And so our school is on hand to support schools, and we'll continue to do so, and we'll continue to raise it through the forums that we have with school leaders, but also school business leaders as well. But if there are specific examples, we do ask that those are raised because it's helpful to share that information with other schools around good practice, which we do as well, but also where action could have been taken that might have avoided, say, part of a school closing or a sports day needing to be cancelled, etc. And so that's work that we continue to be committed to. I think, Matt, you mentioned about the maximum temperature in classrooms, and we discussed this at length internally, but also through the trade union forums and at this group as well. It's reasonably clear and understood that the maximum temperature isn't necessarily a good way of measuring the thermal comfort. And so the guidance really sets out those, you know, common sense approaches to understanding people's sense of the comfort within a classroom, not taking a temperature within a classroom, because the temperature on a thermometer might be reasonable in comparison to a maximum temperature, but the comfort in the classroom may not, depending on humidity, direct sunlight, and a whole host of other aspects. And so actually the guidance enables schools to be more flexible in managing those impacts and taking on board both student and staff views around it. And so it's not something that we've progressed in this iteration of the guidance.
Okay. Thanks for that. So well, I'm going to move on really because time's ticking on.
It's 1 point.
Go on then.
Thanks, Chair. It's true that temperature isn't the only thing, humidity is anything, but taking away even the temperature means that there isn't anything that members can turn around and say it's uncomfortable, because they can say, I think it's uncomfortable. The school may disagree, but now there isn't any objective external marker like temperature or humidity that we can say, well, Ealing says that's too hot. And so you've taken that away.
So we haven't taken it away because there wasn't a maximum temperature. And so we've not removed that from guidance. And I can understand that may, ultimately it may be perceived as helpful, but ultimately if a member of staff says a classroom is uncomfortable and the students are saying that is cause for the leadership team within the school to take note and consider their risk assessment for that classroom. And so we'd be concerned if concerns were being raised and they weren't being addressed appropriately by the leadership team in the school.
Okay, thanks for that. So then moving on then to the other items for tonight. So these are the council side items. So who's going to lead on the Burgundy book, the new version? Mark.
So just to confirm to colleagues that the Burgundy book is a national agreement between the 5 teacher unions and the national employers. It says 5 here. So the handbook, which sets out the conditions of service, so teachers will be familiar with it, hasn't been updated for over 2 decades. It's now been updated, but there's no changes to conditions of service. It's more about terminology and things that needed to be updated because they didn't keep pace with legislation. So that document is now available readily for people to look at, the Burgundy book in its new format. And your national unions would have already been involved in that discussion when it came to doing that. There is going to be another stage of that. Again, that will be something that will be discussed at length with your national unions.
Okay, we are in possession, the NEU, of some guidance, and I think Matt, you want to talk about it.
Yeah, just very briefly, we were briefed on it in Manchester as district and branch secretaries. We also have a document on what the union was hoping for in each section. So more than happy to share this with council, and if council have any equivalent documentation, we'd be quite keen to see it as well, just to make sure we're on the same page, and yeah, just for the sake of collaboration. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Is that enough of that? Okay, then. So then the next things is item 10, schools buyback of HR services for the next academic.
So we discussed this briefly at the last meeting. We've now gone through the school buyback round, and I'm just going to comment on the HR services. So there's other services, obviously, that schools get the option to purchase. Mindful that there have been 2 amalgamations of schools, the Berrymeads that now become Acton Gardens and the Dormers Wells Infant and Junior now becoming the primary, the numbers would automatically have dropped by 2 because you're actually having 2 schools considering rather than 4, if you like. But allowing for that, taking that into account, on the different HR services, my own HR advice and consultancy service has decreased by that. We're down 8 schools. Payroll and administration have stayed the same. Pensions have stayed the same. There's a slight decrease in those that are bought into long-term sickness and maternity insurance. Occupational health services are down by about 13. So that's the situation. I discussed with those heads that decided not to buy into my service. I've spoken to 7 of those that didn't want to buy in. So I got some feedback from them about why they didn't. I do realise that a number of them have gone to a private sector provider called Judicium, and you'll no doubt be aware of that if you're now dealing with them in terms of some of your casework. So not the best of news for my own team and for occupational health, but for other parts of HR, they stayed fairly steady.
Okay, Stefan, you were indicating.
What do you think the local authorities should do to try and persuade? What could be done to make, what could the local authority do to help you to make HR more desirable from those that have gone to Judicium?
Invest hundreds of thousands so we can be about the same size as Judicium. It's not, we can't compete with an organisation that's nationally set up and can offer a range of services that schools decide is a better option for the price they can offer. But we're considering things, Stefan. I mean, we like to think that our local knowledge the way we support schools, the unlimited advice and attendance we'll give them. We hope that sways some schools, but some schools have decided that now's the time to change, and they have, unfortunately, for us.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, I'm aware that Councillor Lapole, you might need to leave basically now. Yeah, next few minutes, and I'm not sure that in terms of the officer side, this may be swift, but it may not be from the union side. So item 11, teachers' pay and school teachers review body, the long awaited report. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to, we talked about pay and other matters earlier on. The STRB submitted their report to the government on the 16th of May. Then there was a leak in the Sunday Times, which said that the amount that they put forward was 6.5%. The government have said we don't normally respond to this until sometime in July. You've all heard what the Prime Minister has said about his concern about public sector pay rises and how that might impact on inflation. So that's just, if you like, background and context. You might also know that Parliament rises for summer in its recess on the 21st of July. So if we don't get it by the 21st of July, it's not coming out until September probably, which is another concerning thing. We're also aware that there's been lots of speculation about how much of the pay rise would or wouldn't be funded by the government, whether it would give any extra funding or whether it would only give a certain amount of funding. But as I say, it's all speculation at the moment, and we can all probably give our own guesses about where we think it might end up. But whilst those issues remain on the table, that no doubt is leading people like the NEU and the other teacher unions and the support staff unions, but for a different reason, to consider what action they think they need to take.
Okay, thanks for that. So Matt first. So Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mark, for the update. Obviously, we appreciate it's not much you can do in your position, but I do want to just make a comment on sort of the process this year and our dispute as a whole. I mean, the government likes to make a point that, oh, this is what we do every year. We leave it until July, but every year we have said it's worth publishing early so schools can prepare their budgets if it's not funded, and that teachers know what they're being paid. So it's a bit insulting, particularly this year, that actually we've been on dispute. We have taken 6 days strike action. We're going to take 2 more. As Stefan said earlier, we're looking good to pass the threshold for the reballot to strike again next term. So it's just doubly insulting that they're just not engaging with us in any meaningful way. And on the Prime Minister's point that our wages, which is below inflation, the pay rises that is, are driving inflation is not true. The IMF have released evidence that it's actually corporate profits, rising corporate profits. That is the largest contributor to Europe's inflation over the past 2 years. So given that corporate profits have gone up massively and our wages have gone down in real terms, I think there's an obvious reallocation of resources there. So frankly, as a teacher, it's just really insulting that our government just pay us no respect, no time at all. They can say what they want about the respect they have for our work and so on, but that's obviously just words because it's not been followed up by anything meaningful. So yeah, just wanted to make that point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And Stefan.
Bit shorter than that. When the NEU membership rejected the 4.5%, the response from cabinet ministers is being recorded because it was parliamentary question time. Gillian Keegan, Sharps, Rishi Sunak all said, in which case then we'll leave it to the STRB. Whatever the STRB says, that's what you're going to get. Talks are over. We're not talking to you anymore. Now that the STRB is saying 6.5, now Rishi Sunak has turned around and said, well, we're not going to listen to the independent school teachers pay and review body.
Okay, thanks for that. Anybody else wants to say anything? Because we can just confirm the date of the next meeting. Yeah, it's there. It's the
10th of October.
10th of October. And thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thank you.